Welcome to Street Level Startups. I'm your host, Katie O'Block, coming to you from the galvanized Platte campus. This season, we're getting more acquainted with Colorado's booming startup scene, and in this episode, we're looking at the evolutionary process of a startup. Over 69% of entrepreneurs start their businesses at home, and a third of small businesses start with less than $5,000. So what is actually involved in launching a startup? Producer Gary Stebbins from Ruby Hill Broadcast and Video breaks it down into 3 phases. The first potentially being the hardest, the development phase.
The term startup is everywhere these days. One may picture a room full of 20-somethings coding the next hip app while eating their avocado toast somewhere in Silicon Valley. This is true to an extent. After all, who doesn't love a good avocado toast? But it only paints part of a much larger picture.
Startups are part of the engine of America.
An engine that continues to challenge the status quo and drive innovation.
They're typically based on innovation and looking to scale very rapidly.
And they innovate in areas and provide improvement in everyday lifestyle and just productivity in the business world to new products and services that people benefit from.
Startup is just a modern term for an early stage company, but one that is designed to grow fast, where at its core is an idea that is hopefully marketable, repeatable, and scalable. But before they can grow, all businesses need to have a few key things in place. The first stage of a startup's life cycle is the development phase. It is here that many decisions about how the business is structured are made. The most important piece of this puzzle is the idea behind the business. The idea is the bedrock on which the company is built.
Early days, all a startup is are the people and their ideas. That's it. At our core with Guild, what we're trying to do is ensure that working adults have access to the education they need to advance in their career. What we do, serving low-income adults to go back to school, is a problem that 64 million Americans face. At Guild, we've trademarked and invented this concept of education as a benefit, comparable to how other benefits like healthcare and 401k have been adopted as something that companies ought to do in order to support their employees. We think of ourselves as sitting right at that intersection of education for employment, ensuring that the right students in the U.S. are getting connected to great nonprofit universities with financial support from their company. That ties really closely to my core belief, which is that education is something that is a right and not a privilege. When I was a kid growing up here in Colorado, my grandfather was governor and my grandmother was obviously first lady. He was what they would now call an education governor. Meanwhile, my grandmother made education really her cause as first lady. But I also had 2 other grandparents, neither of whom had the opportunity to go to college. They all played a really significant role in why I believe in what we do at Guild.
So I think one of the things that's important to understand about Food Maven is we are passionate about our mission. So again, our vision is to make sure that all food gets used with good purpose. The US food system is great at producing a lot of food, pretty good at making sure that the store shelves are always stocked, not good at making sure everything gets used. And so we figured out how to intervene and capture that food and make a market, typically with restaurants, institutional kitchens like hotels and universities. And for us, not only is it a profitable business, but there are a number of really positive impacts because we're generating for farmers and ranchers that were otherwise losing those revenues. For the food that doesn't get purchased, we're donating for charity, and then we're keeping food out of landfills. So there's a very profitable model, but also a model that has positive social impacts.
The next step in this early phase is to find some validation of the idea. A business is nothing without someone to buy the product. It's therefore vital to find out if their product or idea is marketable.
But that first year of our life was really about ideation and figuring out, does anyone want this idea? Can we get universities to get excited about what we're doing? Can employers get excited about what we're doing, and can we align their incentives? And that's where we had a lot of success, was realizing that employers were not only willing to help us meet their employees so that we could help them go back to school, but they were willing to pay. So that day, I remember when we had enough data points that said this was something we could get employers to pay for, feeling like that was a light bulb day.
I mean, our core value proposition, our core early test was until food and money were changing hands that was otherwise going to get lost, we didn't know if this thing would really work. The aha moment really occurred when we had both buyers and suppliers saying it was a great idea. And when buyers and suppliers were willing to have money exchange hands along with food that was otherwise getting lost. And once we had done that in a repeatable fashion over and over again, and had some pretty big names on both the supply as well as the buy side tell us we were on to something, but also really thought leaders in the industry saying this is something that could really work.
Once the idea is validated by the market, it is necessary for these companies to secure funding to help achieve their business goals. This can be obtained through 3 different paths. One can bootstrap or self-fund their venture. This is ideal for maintaining full control of your company. A second option are angel investors. These are individuals who invest in a company in return for an ownership stake. And finally, there's venture capitalists, or VCs for short. These are funds who use a pool of money to fund new business ideas, also in exchange for an ownership stake. With many funding paths to choose from, it is important to pick the right one for your business model and one that aligns with the vision of the company.
I think one of the common kind of founder mistakes is to get investors that don't really share the vision of how long this is going to take.
If you take money from institutional investors, like a venture capitalist, those VCs have to get their money back because they have to pay their investors back. That means you're putting your company on a shot clock.
I think founders need to be kind of savvy about those investor motivations and choose wisely and manage that process with investors.
But that early on, it's often more art than science. And that's because the VCs will tell you at seed stage they're betting on people and market size and a little bit on the idea, probably in that rank order. And so you got to understand, is there a match between you and your vision and what they like to invest in?
When I asked our lead investor on our Series A round what they want to have as their typical hold, the answer was forever. We invest in companies we would want to own forever. Now that was music to my ears because what we're doing is going to take some time.
For us, because we were building a marketplace, we were building a pretty complex business that had multi sides. We had the employers on one side, the universities on the other, and that was our connection back to our students, who are our third stakeholder. It wasn't something we could immediately stand up and fund without raising some capital, because we believed we needed to do something that would scale nationally.
Funding is not an end in itself, it's a means to being able to realize the vision.
With funding secure and a market-ready idea, it's at this point that a company enters the second phase of the startup life cycle, growth and expansion.
The growth and expansion phase can be exciting and intimidating for any startup. Our street-level team talks to industry leaders who offer some practical advice on scalable success.
With the first steps of the startup journey behind them, and having successfully secured funding after determining the marketability of the core idea, a company then takes its first steps into the market. Here, they hope to turn their idea into customers and ultimately dollars. This is the growth phase, and is where the startup determines if their idea is repeatable and ultimately scalable. To put it simply, can the company take their idea beyond their initial buyers and grow it to national or international level sales?
First year, you're in operations mode. You have students for the first time, you have employer partners and university partners for the first time. You're figuring out if the engine can hum. Then you're thinking about the next phase, how to fine-tune that engine and make sure that you can bring more people onto the team and go from 0 to 1 to 1 to 10 in terms of your partners and what you're doing.
I think you have to be able to translate, you have to be really clear about what the value proposition is and what moves people and how you can get ordinary salespeople to actually repeat the results. That could be through marketing materials or through direct sales efforts or online conversions. There are other times it could be through a viral social media campaign where you're getting people kind of involved with your program. It can be through acquisition. At Food Maven, acquisition is part of our scaling strategy. So there are a lot of different ways to scale. It kind of depends on the particulars of the business. But you've got to be able to go from those early kind of religious buyers, those religious conversion experiences, to something that's kind of more mundane and repeatable.
So I remember the day that we had a number of student conversations and realized how many of them, they were students disclosing to us, we haven't actually completed high school, but please don't tell my boss, please don't tell my company. I know this program was rolled out as a college program, but do you have anything to help me complete high school so I can then go to college? And that conversation and then 10 like it were what inspired us to actually start a high school completion program and to add that to the Guild catalog, and then to seek approval from companies like Chipotle to help support that program. So those moments are the ones that stand out for me, where they've really shifted where we're going. And today, high school completion is one of Guild's fastest growing programs. In fact, I found out yesterday that we've had over 300 graduates just this year.
The first step was we just started in Colorado Springs alone. And for the first year or so of our existence, we were just purely in Colorado Springs. Then we expanded to the Denver market, opened up operations in Denver, and treated that as kind of one entity. Part of what we learned as we went along is it made sense for us to acquire companies because of the facilities they had, because of the book of business they had, and to be able to convert them to our model via our technology and our leadership and our brand. So we then made a first acquisition initially in Denver, because that gave us the ability to assimilate that company, but it was a car drive away versus an airplane flight. And now we're in process of buying kind of a next company in Dallas. And then the model is for the balance of the year to acquire 5 more companies in 5 more geographies, and then to continue that pattern, on for a number of years.
And then the next phase is, well, how big do you want to be? And you design yourself and you structure your company, your organization, your funding, et cetera, quite differently if you have the conviction and sometimes a little bit of crazy to believe that you can be something that is national, scalable, and greater than what you can imagine from day one.
So here's the reality about the U.S. food system. It's a $1.5 trillion system. I mean, it feeds all of us. And there are literally somewhere between $200 and $300 billion a year of food that's getting lost. So there is an enormous amount of room for us to grow, not just geographically, but in terms of the impact that we can have in the food system, and to ultimately be kind of a transforming presence. So that's where, when I say it's going to take a long time, 10 to 15 years to accomplish this big thing that we're about is, we've got a lot of growth in front of us.
So Guild is growing at a pretty exponential rate, which is really fun, really daunting, and a challenge every day. We expect to double the size of the team here. We tripled the team last year. We're going to slow down a little bit and just double this year, but that's still feeling pretty daunting. So we'll probably start creeping up towards 500 employees this time next year. But more importantly, we plan to grow the business a lot more than that. And like any year, it's important that the business grows more than the headcount. And so the business is growing at an exponential rate as well. And the way we're doing that is by growing the size of our student base with our existing clients, companies like Walmart, Disney, Discover, Lowe's, as well as bringing on many new corporate partners who are excited about the opportunity to provide education to their frontline workforce. And we're working to figure out how might we scale this to millions.
This growth phase comes to an end in its own time for each individual startup. When the business is thriving, has regular sales, and can stand on its own financially, it ceases to be a startup and moves into the third and final phase of the life cycle, maturity and liquidity.
In this next phase, a startup can finally see the finish line and all the sweat equity pays off. Street-level producers talk to the experts about the liquidation process.
The last phase of a startup's life cycle begins when it is no longer considered a startup. The idea has found market fit, it has regular sales, and continues to add customers. It's at this point that a startup is now considered a mature company. When a company reaches this stage, it may choose or be forced into what is called a liquidity event. This is when the early investors may want to collect on their investment, to reap what they help sow. But the liquidity event, like most elements of the startup life cycle, can manifest in many different ways and come at a variety of times.
By definition, a liquidity event really is the exchange of a significant number of shares, usually a majority of the shares of the company in a transaction.
And startups typically will not have things like distributions in the way of, or a dividend in the way that a public company might. And so instead, most investors of a startup will ride along until the startup does one of two or three things. One is sell itself. So to the extent that there's an acquisition or a merger, that may provide liquidity to the owners of a startup, that is, a way to get paid back.
I mean, the other thing that has been a path to liquidity has been going public. And so you're actually, selling your shares to the public, and it's a way for investors and to some degree for early employees to be able to cash out on the value that they've created.
On average, where a company moves to a liquidity event, usually it's time related, but it can be driven by the outside, right? It may be driven by particular interest in a technology. So some companies may be acquired early on in their life cycle where they have a specific technology that a large company needs.
And I've been a CEO many times, and I will tell you that most of the time, the liquidity event comes when some other company says, we really value what you have, and we'd like to make this kind of an offer, and it generates a really attractive return to investors. And as a company, you feel like you'll be able to make a bigger difference being part of that company versus going it alone.
But a liquidity event can also be part of a company going to a different phase of their growth. So for example, Logarithm, we're a mature software company, no longer a startup, and it's enabled us to kind of partner with an investor and private equity firm. There's a lot of experience taking companies and expertise taking companies like Logarithm from where we are to much bigger paths down the road.
Logarithm is a Boulder-based cybersecurity company. Essentially, they keep data and networks safe from outside attacks and threats. They have been around since 2005 and are a respected leader and innovator in the cybersecurity field. But in 2018, they sought a partner to help them grow even further. They found this partner in Thoma Bravo, a private equity firm who specializes and are experts in the cybersecurity realm. Logarithm saw this as an opportunity to continue to innovate, grow, and lead in their field.
What made Logarithm attractive to Thoma Bravo? I think a few things. Thoma Bravo was one of the private equity firms that have been actually following us for a while. So they knew us, they knew the team and liked the team, they knew the market segment. They have a lot of, all they do is software. So we're a software company, so that obviously is a critical criteria. But they also have a lot of investments and expertise in the security market. Their expertise in software and security is really important as we try to go from where we are today, a very mature software security company to a much larger one. They bring a lot of best practices and knowledge and expertise around taking a software company from where we are to where we're going. And that was really, really valuable, and it's proven to be the case early on, just 7-8 months into this relationship.
A move like this, in a way, can help a company return to its startup roots. A startup has the advantage of being able to pivot, innovate, and adjust quickly. Mature companies have a harder time doing this as they have more and more people and investors to answer to. Thus, a sale to a single investor can simplify the decision-making process and allow a company to be more nimble in its mature form.
You're going from several investors and board members with different levels of interest to really one primary investor. So that, in a lot of ways provides more focus and more synergy and alignment. Is just easier to get to. It's easier to kind of get through decisions on certain areas quicker, and we're benefiting from that. So that's one of the things that's changed on a daily basis. I think having that is already playing out to help us as we go forward to build to the next phases.
In its many forms, the liquidity event can allow an entrepreneur to return to their startup roots. A new investment can lead to the development of other new ideas. Or a buyout can allow an entrepreneur to start work on their next idea. The people at the core of these companies are innovators, and are often not content to rest on their laurels. The liquidity event isn't always the end for a startup, but rather the beginning of the next startup lifecycle.
Now that you have reached the final phase, your startup is ready to conquer the world and take the market by storm. And then you'll be ready to take that capital and do it all over again with your next great idea. Special thanks to producer Gary Stebbins of Ruby Hill Broadcast and Video. On the next episode, we'll look at some examples of how the startup community helps elevate and support one another.
If we want to live in a world that's a reflection of ourselves, of what we look like and what we believe, then we need to have women and people of color.
I know how to do what I've been doing for someone for the past 20 years. I can certainly do it for myself. I'm going to start a business.
There's something else important happening here. They learn how to